Look at her. She's making a fool of herself.
My son's arrogant wife. Had no idea I owned the house. They lived in for years. She called the cops on me. Then this. Please stay with me as I tell you my story. And please do not forget to support our channel by subscribing, liking, and sharing with your loved ones. Your support means the world to us. Now to our story. My name is Debbie Vance, and at 56, I've built a quiet life rooted in hard work, family memories, and real estate. I run a small but thriving property management business in Savannah, Georgia, and I've been a widow for nearly a decade now. My husband, Michael, passed away from a heart attack 12 years ago, leaving me with our son, Francis. My whole world. 3 years ago, my mother passed away. She left me her home in Charleston, South Carolina, a classic brick colonial with a big porch, magnolia trees lining the front yard, and a kitchen that smelled like love and lemon balm. It was the house I grew up in, the house I returned to after Michael died, the house that became my escape, my safe haven, and eventually the gift I thought I could pass down to Francis. At 29, Francis was finding his stride. After a few years of bouncing between jobs, he landed a stable role at a regional ad agency and had been saving to move out of his cramped apartment. He'd always talked about wanting a place that felt like home. So when he called me one afternoon saying he was ready for a new chapter, I offered him the house. "Come stay here," I told him. "Rent-free. Fix it up if you want. And when you're ready, you can either keep it or we'll work something out." Francis had tears in his voice when he said, "Thank you." It was one of the proudest moments of my life. My son finally taking the next step. I handed him the keys with joy. But I never imagined the woman he brought through that front door would try to take everything. Her name was Naomi. They met through friends in Atlanta. She was poised, confident, and polished in that way that felt rehearsed. At first, I was just grateful Francis had someone who seemed to care for him. But from the start, something felt off, like she had walked into a chapter of a story and decided she was going to rewrite it to suit her vision. She moved in quickly. Too quickly. Within a few months, she was answering the door like she owned the place and decorating as if my mother's antique credenza and family photo wall were out of place in her imagined modern home. One day, I dropped by to bring Francis some baked peach cobbler, and Naomi opened the door with a smile that didn't touch her eyes. "Oh," she said, blinking like I had surprised her. "You didn't call." "I didn't think I needed to," I replied, holding up the cobbler. "Just wanted to see how y'all were settling in." Her eyes flicked to the Tupperware dish and then back to me. "Well, we're fine. Just in the middle of some things." She didn't invite me in. Later that evening, Francis called and apologized. "Naomi's just particular about space," he mumbled. "She's trying to create a new energy in the house." I laughed politely, but I felt it. That uneasy tingle of something shifting beneath the surface. Soon, things started disappearing. My grandmother's quilt that had hung over the banister, folded and packed away in the attic. The old wooden rocking chair where my mother used to sit and knit, replaced by a minimalist white stool. Even the dining table scarred with decades of Thanksgiving meals had been swapped out for a glass rectangle with steel legs. When I asked Francis about it, he said, "Naomi's got a vision. She's turning the place into something fresh." "But this house is already full of stories," I said quietly. "It's not just walls and paint." Francis didn't answer. Naomi wasn't unkind. Not exactly. But she had a way of making me feel like a guest in a home that belonged to me. She'd refer to it as our house, with ease, as if her name was carved into the brick. And then one Sunday, she crossed the line. I arrived for dinner, something I'd done every other week since Francis moved in. It was our standing tradition. I knocked, waited, then walked in with my key like I always had. The living room looked like a showroom. Gray walls, marble coffee table, No photos of family anywhere. The warmth was gone. nAny stood at the edge of the kitchen island, sipping a glass of wine. "Oh, you still have a key?" she asked, surprised. "I do," I said slowly. "Why?" She took a long sip. "Francis and I talked about how we might need more privacy moving forward, as a married couple." My heart thudded. Married? She held up her left hand, showing off a diamond ring I hadn't seen before. "He proposed last week. We were going to tell you at dinner." I nodded, stunned. "Congratulations." But inside, something in me twisted. Not because I wasn't happy for my son, of course I was, but because I realized suddenly I wasn't part of this version of his future. I was being pushed out of the home I gave him, the one he was now building a life in without me. What came next would test everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and legacy. And nAny, she wasn't finished yet. A week after they announced the engagement, Francis called and asked if I would consider scaling back my visits to the house. "nAny's just trying to make things feel like ours," he said cautiously. "She says we need space to build our own rhythm." I bit my tongue and agreed, though the pain that settled in my chest lingered long after we hung up. The next time I visited, after calling ahead like a guest, nAny greeted me at the door in a robe and slippers like I was the housekeeper arriving early. "Oh, Debbie, I wasn't expecting you so soon," she said coolly, not budging from the doorway. "I texted Francis," I said, 3 p.m. She gave a tight smile. "Right. Well, he's running late, but you can come in, I guess." Inside, the house was nearly unrecognizable. All signs of my mother's presence had been erased. The soft blue curtains she'd sewn by hand were gone, replaced by sterile linen panels that made the space look like an ad for a furniture catalog. On the wall, where our family portrait once hung, was now a gallery of abstract art. Black and white blocks with no emotion. The living room looked like it had never known laughter, holiday chaos, or sleepy Sunday mornings. I walked past the dining room and froze. My father's old wooden hutch, the one he refinished by hand and passed down to me, was missing. "What happened to the hutch?" I asked quietly. "Oh, that clunky thing," nAny said with a light laugh. "We donated it. It didn't match the new aesthetic." "You donated it?" I repeated. She shrugged. "It was just furniture." No, it was never just furniture. That hutch had held decades of our family's memories. Mom's ceramic bowls, birthday candles from every celebration, the chipped gravy boat my dad insisted we keep using because it still pours just fine. nAny poured herself another glass of wine as I stared at the empty space. "I'm sure you understand, Debbie. Francis and I are building our future. We can't live in a museum of your past." That night, I didn't sleep. I kept thinking of my mother's voice echoing in my head. "You protect this house like it's part of your soul." And I had, until now. Over the following months, my visits became rare, awkward, and monitored. nAny would always hover close, correcting Francis's stories, changing the subject when I brought up old times, or outright dismissing my questions. "Let's not dwell on the past," she'd say in that sugary tone. That night, Francis and I stayed up until almost 2 a.m., flipping through old photos and handwritten notes. We sat cross-legged on the living room floor, surrounded by worn envelopes, recipe cards, and Polaroids that smelled faintly of cedar and thyme. Each picture told a story. Francis's first birthday with icing smeared on his cheeks. My mother in her Easter hat holding a sweet potato pie. Michael standing at the grill in a kiss the cook apron, smiling like life was just that simple. "This was the day Dad dropped the turkey," Francis said with a chuckle, pointing at a picture of a bird on the floor and me holding a mop in the background, exasperated. "And your grandma refused to eat it even though we rinsed it off and baked it again?" I added, laughing. In that laughter, I heard something I hadn't in months. Relief. Joy. The sound of something healing. Francis looked up at me. I didn't know how to say it before, but I'm sorry for letting her shut you out, for letting her change everything. I reached for his hand. You're still my son, Francis. I never stopped loving you. I just wanted you to see what was happening before it was too late. He nodded slowly. I think I wanted to believe I had everything under control, that if I looked like I had a happy marriage, then I didn't have to admit I felt lost. We were silent for a while, the quiet between us no longer heavy, but honest. The next morning, while Francis stepped out to clear his head, nAny returned. She didn't knock. I was in the kitchen when I heard the front door open and heels clicking across the hardwood. Francis? She called. When she saw me, her expression soured immediately. Where is he? Out, I said, calm but firm. You should have called. This is still my home, she snapped, brushing past me. No, I said quietly, stepping in front of her. It never was. She laughed, a bitter, ugly sound. You really think this little stunt of yours changes everything? Francis loves me. He's just confused. And you? You're the one causing all this drama. You always have been. I didn't flinch. I'm not here to argue with you, nAny. I'm here to protect what's mine, and more importantly, what's his, the truth. She dropped her purse on the counter and began pacing the kitchen like a caged animal. He's nothing without me. He was spiraling before I came into his life. I gave him structure, purpose, direction. I cleaned up your sad little shrine of a house. You erased his identity, I replied. You isolated him from his roots. That's not love. That's control. Her eyes flashed. I made this place livable. I improved it. You want to talk legal? I have rights. Marital property, investment of labor. I reached into the drawer and pulled out a printed letter from my attorney, already prepared after our last conversation. According to Georgia law, there's no marital claim to this property unless you can prove financial contribution or documented ownership. You contributed nothing financially. The deed is in my name. Your claim is void. She snatched the letter and scanned it. I'll find a lawyer who disagrees, she spat. Good luck, I said simply. In the meantime, you're not welcome here. She lunged toward the hallway, perhaps out of habit, maybe looking for Francis. But I stepped in front of her again. You need to leave. The fire in her eyes flickered, then roared. You think you've won? This isn't about winning, I said. It's about healing, and I won't let you poison this house any longer. nAny grabbed her purse, eyes still blazing, and stormed out. That night, Francis returned and I told him what happened. He didn't look surprised. She called me, he said. Left 4 voicemails, each one angrier than the last, then suddenly sweet, then threatening. I reached for his shoulder. Do you feel safe? He gave me a tired smile. I do now. I cut in. She's been selling family heirlooms, your father's flag, my mother's lamp, the dining table gone. Where are those things now, Francis? He opened his mouth, then closed it again. He didn't know. Gone, I said flatly. Sold online. The listing is in her name. nAny turned toward him, her eyes wide with panic now. I didn't do anything you didn't approve. You told me to make the house our own. I told you we could paint, Francis shouted. Not sell off my family's legacy like junk. The doorbell rang. We all froze. It rang again, sharp, urgent. nAny rushed to the door, probably grateful for the interruption. But when she opened it, 2 uniformed officers stood there. Good evening, one of them said politely. We received a call regarding a possible civil dispute involving ownership and property destruction. nAny stepped aside, eyes darting. I didn't call the police. I did, I said. Francis turned to me in shock. Francis, I gave you every opportunity to be honest, but I'm not going to let my parents' memory be destroyed. Inside, I handed the officers the documents, deed, will, photos of the items listed online. Officer Daniels, a tall black man in his 40s, skimmed them and nodded slowly. These all appear valid. Legally, Ms. Vance owns the property. Her name isn't even on the lease. nAny shrieked. This is my home, too. I'm his wife. The younger officer, Jenkins, raised an eyebrow. Ma'am, there is no lease. There is no rental agreement. Your husband lives here at his mother's discretion. That changes everything. nAny clenched her fists. He said this was our house. Francis's voice cracked. I thought I could fix things later. I didn't think it mattered. It mattered, I said softly. It mattered when she told me to stop coming, when my key was disabled, when you stopped answering my calls. nAny turned to the officers. So what now? You just going to let her kick us out? No one's being kicked out tonight, Officer Daniels said calmly. But Ms. Vance has every right to decide who stays in her home. If she asks you to leave, we will assist in ensuring that happens peacefully. nAny spun on Francis. Are you going to let her do this to us? I think you already did it to yourself, he whispered. For the first time, I saw my son's eyes clear like a fog had lifted. He looked ashamed, heartbroken, but no longer confused. nAny stepped back like she'd been slapped. You don't mean that. Francis didn't respond. The officers remained until nAny packed an overnight bag and slammed the front door behind her. When they left, silence filled the house like smoke. Francis sat on the couch, head in his hands. I never meant for any of this to happen, he whispered. I know, I said, sitting beside him, but it did. He lifted his eyes to mine, wet with regret. I let her push you out. I let her push me around too. I thought I was building something, but I was just hiding. Grief makes us vulnerable, I said, but hiding doesn't protect you. It just postpones the truth. We sat like that for a long time, mother and son, surrounded by a home that had once been filled with warmth, now stripped bare by ambition, assumptions, and silence. Then Francis did something that surprised me. He walked upstairs. 10 minutes later, he came back down with a dusty box from the attic. I found this earlier, he said, placing it on the coffee table. It's all that's left of Grandma's letters, photo albums, and that old church cookbook she used to love. I opened the box slowly, reverently. Let's start putting it all back together, he said. And we did. The future's much more exciting. Francis had changed too. Once confident and warm, now he seemed hesitant around me. Careful with his words, as if walking a tightrope. Then came the final blow. One Saturday, I stopped by to retrieve some documents from the house, old mortgage files I kept in the office closet. I had always kept a small drawer in the study for family papers, tax forms, and estate items. I texted Francis, but he didn't respond. Using my key, I let myself in. The silence was thick. I walked through the house, passing by the staircase where my mother used to take yearly photos of Francis in his school uniforms. That wall now had nothing but a cold black and white canvas titled Ascension. I reached the office. My drawer was gone. Instead, the space had been turned into nAny's home studio, complete with a ring light, white backdrop, and a cluttered desk full of expensive makeup and vlogging equipment. I scanned the room. No documents, no family files. I walked over to the small cabinet near the window where I had once stored backup copies of the deed and our parents' will. Gone. I stood there in shock. Then I heard a ding. nAny's laptop was open on the desk. On the screen, an online listing for my late mother's Tiffany-style lamp, one of a kind, passed down from my grandmother. It was listed under an account named nAny's in Home, priced at $750. Bile rose in my throat. I scrolled. There were dozens more. My father's military flag in a frame. The silver cutlery set we only used on Christmas. The old paintings that once hung in the foyer. She had been selling our family. When I heard the door open downstairs, I didn't hide. nAny's heels clicked on the hardwood. She called out, "Francis, is that you?" I walked down slowly, heart pounding. When she saw me, her eyes narrowed. "Debbie, what are you doing here?" "I came to get some documents." "Where's Francis?" She crossed her arms. "Out with friends." I held her gaze. "Does he know you've been selling family heirlooms?" Her eyes flickered. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I saw the listings. My mother's lamp, my father's medals. You're making money off things you didn't build." Her expression hardened. "They're Francis's now, and he gave me permission." "That's funny," I replied, pulling out a folded envelope from my purse. "Because the deed to this house is in my name." nAny froze. "I never transferred the title," I said. "Francis is staying here rent-free because I love him. But this is my property, and those items, they weren't his to give away." She opened her mouth to argue, but I wasn't finished. "I've let this go on too long, but that ends now. You may have erased the photos, the quilts, the furniture, but you won't erase me." When Francis walked in that evening, he looked relaxed until he saw my face and nAny's stiff posture across the room. "What's going on?" he repeated, glancing between us. nAny was the first to speak. "Your mother broke into the house," she said, folding her arms. "She went through my laptop, accused me of theft, and claimed she owns this house." I didn't flinch. "You didn't tell her the truth, Francis?" He looked startled. "What truth?" I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder, worn at the edges, but still solid. I opened it and held out the top document. "This is the deed. The house is in my name. Your grandmother left it to me. You've been living here rent-free as I intended." "But you never told nAny that, did you?" Francis's face drained of color. He faltered. "She assumed it was mine, and I didn't correct her." nAny stepped back like he'd slapped her. "You lied to me?" Her voice cracked. "You let me believe this was our home." "I never said it wasn't," Francis snapped. "You assumed, and I didn't want to ruin things." The next day, we met with my attorney and filed a formal restraining order against nAny. The court granted it based on the emotional manipulation, online sales of family property, and trespassing. The paperwork moved quickly. A week later, we discovered she had taken more than just furniture. A neighbor called and said someone had seen nAny loading framed boxes into her car at night, long before we discovered the items missing. My father's Navy medals, my mother's hand-painted porcelain figurines, the baby blanket I crocheted for Francis when he was born. She had hidden our history like contraband. With a police escort, we visited a storage unit she'd secretly rented, listed under a false name, but tied to her email. Inside, we found our family heirlooms packed carelessly in plastic tubs and duct-taped boxes. The sight broke me. Francis stood still, staring at his baby photos crumpled beside a broken Christmas ornament. "I thought she cared," he whispered. "She cared about what you could offer her," I said gently. "Not who you really are." We recovered nearly everything. Some pieces were damaged, others were lost. But the core of our history, photo albums, the quilt, my father's letters from overseas, was back where it belonged. Not just in our possession, but in our story. It took several weeks for the dust to settle, both literally and emotionally. After the restraining order was served and the storage unit was cleared out, Francis and I began the slow process of restoring, not just the house, but ourselves. What once felt like a battleground was beginning to feel like home again. We unpacked the photo albums one Saturday afternoon and spread them across the dining table, the old one I had moved back into the house, the one nAny had discarded for something trendier. As we flipped through pages, we shared stories, some funny, others quiet and tender, like soft tissue pulled from a wound. "I used to think this house was just a place," Francis said, holding a photo of his grandmother sitting on the porch with her Bible. "But it's not. It's our anchor." We repainted walls, we rehung the family photos. We brought Grandma's quilt back to its rightful place on the stair railing. Every change we made was intentional, respectful, a reclaiming of legacy. Francis decided to start therapy. His idea, not mine. He found a counselor who specialized in emotional abuse and recovery from toxic relationships. Every week I saw him stand a little taller, speak a little clearer, reclaiming the self he had nearly lost. Meanwhile, Naomi's world unraveled. It turned out this wasn't her first time manipulating a relationship. Her background unraveled piece by piece. 2 previous marriages, one of which ended with a court-issued restraining order. Her late husband wasn't dead at all. He was very much alive, living in Texas, and had filed for a permanent protection order years earlier. Her resume, which once boasted credentials from a prestigious interior design firm, was full of inconsistencies. A paper empire built on charm, deceit, and carefully spun lies. She tried to fight the restraining order in court, but was quickly silenced when confronted with her fabricated documents and the recovered property found in her storage unit. Eventually, she disappeared from our lives completely. And still, I found myself waking some mornings wondering how it all could have gone so wrong. I had tried to give my son a foundation to build on love and memory. And instead, he'd nearly lost himself to someone who viewed that gift as a resource to exploit. But then came the Sunday that changed everything. We had returned to our family tradition of dinner every other weekend, just Francis and me. Sometimes with a friend or two of his, but always grounded in home. He arrived with a bouquet of sunflowers, his grandmother's favorite. "I have something to tell you," he said, placing the flowers in the old ceramic vase that had once belonged to my great-aunt. I sat down the peach cobbler and waited. "I found an apartment," he said, "not too far, about 10 minutes away." My stomach tightened, but I smiled. "That's great." He reached for my hand. "It's not because I want distance, Mom. It's because I'm ready." I nodded, tears in my eyes. "I always knew you would be. And I want you to keep the house. Not just legally, emotionally. I know now that this is your sanctuary, Grandma's legacy. One day, maybe I'll have a family of my own. But I won't ever pretend this house wasn't yours first." We hugged for a long time right there in the kitchen. The next weekend, we worked with my attorney to set up a trust, one that ensured the home would stay in our family, but protected from any future entanglements. The house would never again be treated like a bargaining chip or temporary convenience. It was sacred now, officially, and forever. By autumn, the home was not just restored, it was healed. The walls no longer echoed with silence, but with music, laughter, the smell of gumbo on the stove, and cornbread in the oven. Francis's therapy was working. He started freelancing again, designing logos and branding packages for small Black-owned businesses. He found his joy again, not in someone else's validation, but in his own growth. And me? I allowed myself to feel proud, not just of him, but of myself. For standing my ground, for not backing down, for refusing to let anyone erase what generations had built with love and sacrifice. One evening, as fireflies blinked across the backyard, Francis and I sat on the porch sipping sweet tea. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't walked in that day?" he asked. I looked out over the yard where his father once pushed him on the tire swing all the time. "I do, sometimes, but I believe things happen when we're finally ready to face them." He nodded thoughtfully. "Thank you for not giving up on me." "I never could," I whispered. Then I raised my glass and tapped it gently against his. "To healing. To legacy," he replied. Months later, we hosted our first true family gathering at the house, something we hadn't done since before my mother passed. Cousins came from across state lines, neighbors brought sweet tea and pound cake, kids played tag in the yard, laughter filled every room. Naomi's name never came up. She was a shadow from a season that had passed, but the house, It stood tall, strong, and full again, of memories, of meaning, of love. This time, nobody questioned who it belonged to. If this story moved you or reminded you of a time when you had to stand your ground to protect your family, your legacy, or your peace, you're not alone. Let us know in the comments. Hi, besties. Have you ever had to choose boundaries over comfort to protect what mattered most? And if you believe stories like this help bring awareness to the quiet strength behind family bonds and emotional healing, please leave a comment, hit the like button, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful real-life stories about love, legacy, and standing up for yourself. Thank you for watching. This is your reminder. The house may have walls, but it's your voice that makes it a home.